Today's podcast is brought to you by Isoway Sports, the sports range for athletes looking for supplements that are free from all artificial colours, flavours, sweeteners and added fructose. Intense physical training programs place significantly higher nutritional demands on sports people, and Isoway Sports are committed to providing pure nutritional ingredients that are truly complementary to a healthy, active lifestyle. You can visit isowaysports.com.au for more information. This is FX Medicine and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. And joining me on the line today, all the way from sunny Lismore, is Chris Oliver. Chris has a Master's in Ag Science, Nutrition and Public Health, and he's a registered nutritionist. Importantly, he's the Research Director of the Blackmores Institute, and he's very interested in body composition and ageing amongst a wealth, and I mean a wealth of other things, because every couple of weeks I'll sit down and I'll sift through the legion of study articles, synopses and abstracts that Chris sends through to tease us, to make our brains swim. So I'd like to welcome you heartily to FX Medicine, Chris.
Thanks, Andrew.
Now, Chris, today we're going to be talking about the importance of sarcopenia and how important it is to maintain a healthy muscle mass for healthy ageing and longevity. So this has been an area of interest for you for a long time, yes?
Yeah, it has been, yes.
Just before we go into that, can I just ask you to give our listeners a little bit of background into your education and what drew you to nutrition from Ag Science?
Well, I've always been interested in nutrition, but coming from a family that has a farming background, I did Ag Science. I don't have a Master's in Ag Science. I have a Master's in Public Health, but just got a degree in Ag Science.
Gotcha.
But, from a farming background, that's what I initially wanted to do. But actually, in that year, in my final year of Ag Science, I actually did a small trial on vitamin C and glucose in humans, and that's like just spurred me on, interestingly, into wanting to work further in nutrition. So I went from that course to work for Blackmores, and then went back and did nutrition at uni, and then went back to Blackmores, but via working in HIV research for 3 or 4 years.
Oh, really?
And that's where I encountered doing work in body composition, and that's really sparked my interest since then.
Now, that's crucial in HIV because the extremely toxic, poisonous drugs that they have to give these HIV sufferers, they have to work that out from muscle mass, not body mass, correct?
To be honest, where they are with quad therapy and all that kind of thing is that I was there in the late 1980s, and at that stage, really all they had was AZT was just the only thing that was on the go at that point. But one of the critical things at that juncture was this thing called HIV wasting syndrome, and it was people just losing a lot of muscle, and often being the cause of death, if you know what I mean, in AIDS patients. So we actually did a longitudinal study looking at the at body composition in people who were relatively asymptomatic, and just seeing whether there were changes in body composition preceding the onset of full AIDS. Yeah.
Okay, so basically their body composition affecting their immunity.
Well, the theory was, and I think we had a little bit of evidence, so it's controversial, is that that there may have been changes to muscle mass preceding them actually their decline in T-cell counts and before the onset even of other disease, if you know what I mean. So it could, and looking back on it, it could be that there it just could have been a generalised high inflammatory state, you know what I mean, driving things. At that stage, we actually didn't have a look at a whole lot of inflammatory markers. But, so that was a very interesting period. And then I guess after that, seeing the impact of muscle on people's, particularly their quality of life, particularly a lot of the patients we had at that point, gay men were very body conscious, and to lose that condition is very upsetting. But then to translate that later on, just with my elderly parents and other elderly relatives and that, and looking at the impact of ageing upon body muscle function, quality of life, was also began to draw on the dots and saying, well, this is just not in diseases like HIV or cancer, but this is an ageing thing. And it was around that time, actually, that someone actually coined the term sarcopenia to describe it. Yeah.
So let's talk about that term, sarcopenia. What exactly is it?
Well, it's originally it was. I'll just give you a definition. It's characterised by progressive, and generalised loss of skeletal muscle mass and strength, with a risk of adverse outcomes such as physical disability, poor quality of life, and death. And I guess the important thing is originally the sarcopenia was really related around muscle mass, but now it is the combination of muscle mass and strength, if you know what I mean, which is important.
Right. Yep.
Because the two, in ageing in particular, there is a disconnect between loss of muscle mass and muscle strength and power. So you lose strength and power a lot more rapidly than you do muscle mass.
Oh, right. Okay.
So functionally, you may actually be more impaired. And it's always difficult sometimes to measure muscle mass, as you know. So
does that equate with a change in fibre type? You know, the white and the red, fast,
yes,
slow twitch.
So this is the interesting part. So if you were to have a look at when people say that you lose muscle, so you do globally, but there's more of a loss of appendicular muscle, which is the arms and legs.
Yep.
And there's more of a loss of leg muscle. Within the leg muscle, there's more of a loss of the thigh muscles. Within the thigh muscles, there's more of a loss of the quads. And in the quads, it's probably the rectus femoris, which you lose more. And it's those type 2 fibres which seem to be lost more or a decrease in size. Again, the science around whether they're decreasing number or sizes depends what paper you read, but there's definitely a change in the type of fibre type, which is related to particularly to power, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So let's talk about, you know, how prevalent this is as a condition. And the first things that come to mind are we're an ageing population and we're a growing population in our girth, and that ain't muscle.
Yeah, well, there's two interesting points there. So the prevalent, but unfortunately, it's a bit like frailty. Everyone knows what a frail person looks like.
Yeah.
Trying to define it medically is very difficult.
Yeah.
It's the same with sarcopenia. So there have been about 4 or 5 different position papers put out as to how you measure it and how you define it.
Yeah.
And the prevalence really can be quite low or quite high, depending upon the type of diagnosis that is used, if you know what I mean, or the thresholds. Now, for me personally, what I'm always thinking about is trying to be at the top of the cliff, not at the bottom.
Yeah.
And so whilst sarcopenia and we need to like that medical definition because if you're going to do drug trials or interventions or get health fund interventions about it, you need some kind of medical diagnosis, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's still not clear at this point as to what it is, though, as I was saying, there's different definitions. But the thing with ageing is to try and stop people moving to that functional impairment. So to my mind is that you can actually have, before you get to sarcopenia, you can still have a fair bit of loss of quality of life before you get medically diagnosed as being impaired, if you know what I mean, anyway. So
I guess medical treatment would be rather confounding because if they don't have a black box to put it in, it's kind of like growing pains. How do you treat growing pains from an evidence-based beginning if you haven't got a clear definition of what growing pains is? There's no medical term for it.
It comes back to what you're saying about the growing girth, everything as well, is that normally what happens is that people just assume it's just ageing, if you know what I mean. Well, it is related to ageing, there's no doubt about it, but people can come into the doctor, sit down, and they appear to be well. They might be a bit overweight. You're talking about increases in our weight as a nation. But unfortunately, they don't look at the muscle component. And I think that's my big push is to say that we shouldn't be worried about body weight. We shouldn't be worried so much about being overweight when people are elderly. It's really the muscle component we need to focus on.
Yeah.
Because if you focus just on the fat, it's not that's really going to drive their morbidity and mortality later in life, if you know what I mean. So the trend is basically if you're overweight or obese in middle age, definitely that's not good, or from young age. But for elderly people, that's where it becomes quite confounding, is that there's a lot of work to show that if you're probably overweight as an elderly person and acquired that over time rather than being progressively overweight since middle age, you're probably going to be better off. And some of the studies would suggest that's possibly because those people who are elderly with normal BMI actually have quite low muscle mass.
Right.
because what can happen over aging is that you can actually maintain exactly the same weight but be losing muscle and gaining fat.
Right.
So BMI slightly loses its effectiveness as a measure. It's more of a measure of muscle in the elderly than it is, and in the younger people, it's more of probably an index of adiposity. Though
right.
I have to stress that's on a population basis, and it's a bit fraught with danger to use it on an individual basis anytime.
So just going back to that muscle versus fat ratio, if you like,
Yep.
I want to just check myself and make sure that what I'm saying is still correct. You know, what I seem to recall is that in your younger years, you could grow muscle cells and divide them and multiply them. And same with fat cells. If you had a high fat diet, then you could actually multiply the number of fat cells in your body. But at a certain stage, they basically became static. You had that number set for life. You could now adjust the size of those cells, whether they be muscles or fat, but you couldn't change the number. Is that still correct, or is that an old theory?
You got me there. Well, I think with adipose tissue, I think that was the theory, but I think I think there is a belief now, and you've got me on question time here, whether that I think you still can have increased fat cells, but I think muscle, I think you do, like, you peak out, and I just want to say to your listeners is that your peak muscle mass, power, strength is in your 30s. So you actually begin to decline after you're in your 30s. So you have a very slight decline, which begins to become more rapid as you age. So
damn it.
Yeah, that's right.
One word.
I say to people,
damn it.
You're over 30. You're already on the slide down. So unless you're intervening, that's what I was saying before about being on the top of the cliff, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
We really got to get people start thinking about it in their 30s, 40s, particularly 50s. If you're not doing resistance training, that kind of thing after 50s, and looking after your diet, you could be on a real slippery slope later on, and you need to get that muscle maintenance, muscle quality curve high early, if you know what I mean, so you don't fall into disability later on. You will decline, but if you're at a higher level, you're not likely to fall into disability, and I think that's deadly important, because what you pointed out, we're living longer, but we're going to live with a lot more disability, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. We're not dying from the killer diseases now. We're keeping people alive.
Yeah, exactly right.
Diabetes, I will always remember when I was nursing, if you were 40 and you came in with type 2 diabetes, it was like, my God, what have you been doing, man? Now, I think I remember a paper saying the mean age of diagnosis, this was admittedly in Auckland, so there's some cultural issues there, but the mean age of diagnosis of diabetes was 15 years of age. 15 years of age. I was dumbfounded.
Well, this slide fits in. If you the presentation I gave the other day, I put up some slides to show that in the last 30, 40 years, whilst our weight, everyone's concentrated on the obesity epidemic, what's also occurring is at the same weight, the same BMI, even in children, they're getting fatter.
Yeah.
Something has to give, and that's muscle. So we're becoming a nation, even of our children, of the muscle declining. Yeah. Now, I actually put a letter into a journal of cachexia and sarcopenia saying, that this is not going to bode well for diabetes. If you know what I mean, we are going to see, and it sounds like we already are seeing,
absolutely,
diabetes, which is going to be diagnosed earlier because the muscle quality is not there. It's the biggest disposal unit of glucose, as you know. And if you don't have good muscle quality, you're up against the curve to start with. Yeah. So, and people are carrying around a lot more weight. They may be the same weight, but they're actually carrying less muscle, though people always seem to concentrate, they're carrying more fat, if you know what I mean. So I think for me, the story is you've got to work on the muscle quality if you're going to be successful on that. As the saying, that muscle is the biggest disposal unit of glucose.
Yeah. So. You talk about the various muscles, and I really did like that that gradation that you made of the various, so whether it's appendicular muscle and then the various types of the muscles and the various the groups of muscles and then the actual muscles that are degraded quicker than others. So are there then certain exercises that would be more attuned to maintaining these muscles? And I'm thinking here about things like yoga?
Well, you're talking to a person who's yoga challenged, Andrew. So.
Me too, mate. Don't worry about it.
But in meditation, I'd love to do it, but I'm not that flexible.
It just looks unco when I do it, mate.
Yeah, totally with me. Well, the thing is, the interest in the legs for me in particular is that there are a lot of studies relating leg power, leg muscle to either diabetes, cognition. There's that interesting study done not so long ago with elderly twins where they followed their cognition over 10 years. And those are the twins with the greater leg power had better cognitive outcomes, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, and the reason why is probably because of mobility, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's the biggest muscle area. And I've got to say in our HIV study, that's what we seem to indicate is that there seemed to be a loss of leg muscle. So when we used to get the guys to strip off the door their anthropometrics, even though that they were clinically well, sometimes you could just look and go, mate, there's something not right with your leg muscles, if you know what I mean. It's that obvious. So there is something that's the biggest area of muscle. And to go back to it as to why is because the body it'll be breaking down that muscle to get the amino acids, to help the immune system, to help the enzymes, to help everything else, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
There's that constant turnover all the time and requirement, particularly if you're probably in an inflammatory state. So, yeah, it could be just being mobile, if you know what I mean. So if you're not mobile, if you're sitting in a chair all day and you can't get out, you can't go and play bowls with your friends, go shopping, there's just a whole lot of things here about social isolation.
Yeah.
And once you're not moving, you get that like spiral of inactivity, less muscle, less activity, less muscle. It's not good. So
I remember reading some time ago about some various ways of testing for body composition. And I think one of the more sensitive was the DEXA scan, whereas there's the bioimpedance, but then there's various machines with bioimpedance. And I think, forgive me if I'm wrong, but something like the 4-channel, and then there's versus the 12-channel. The 12-channel is the big expensive machine that the AIDS wards use to calculate muscle mass, so they can calculate drug doses.
They're all fraught with danger. So DEXA is, even if it's DEXA, not so long ago they were saying if you're going to get your bone, and it's been used obviously for osteoporosis and bone mineral density measurements, that you'd actually have to go back and get remeasured, not on the same brand, but even on the same machine. There's that much variability.
Yeah, right. So it's kind of like your scales or a peak flow meter.
Yeah, so with muscle, the problem is that it'll pick up, it actually measures indirectly bone mineral density and fat, and then it backs that out to give you an estimate of soft tissue. Now, that soft tissue, it can tell you nothing about the quality of that soft tissue. So you can have two people with exactly the same soft tissue in appendicular places. One's absolutely chockers full of fat. The other's beautiful, clean muscle. And that was the other, just to pick up one of your previous points about cells multiplying, is that there's that ectopic fat deposition. So once the body can't hypertrophy its fat cells anymore, it begins to look other places to put it, and that goes into visceral tissue and all that kind of thing, but it also sticks it into muscle, and that can have a real impact on muscle quality.
I see.
So now, just with the BIA, the same thing. There are many different brands. Unfortunately, unfortunately, a lot of them indirectly use measurements of muscle mass adipose based on them being other indirect measurements like DEXA, underwater weighing, things like that.
Yep.
But now they've got this thing where they're actually looking at impedance reactance measurements in themselves, and they may be actually more accurate. So we want to move away from equations, because you'd have to have an equation in your BIA machine, which is related to the gender, the age, and even the medical condition of the person. So, just a lot of them are not accurate because they're invalidated against the population they need to measure against.
That was always my issue with it, is where is the normograph and how many people is it based on? If it's based on a couple of hundred people, that's not a population thing.
Yeah, if you can use the raw data, and that's where a lot of the newer machines give that kind of thing out, and that's the area I think personally that they actually will probably be more useful later on, because they're going to be cheap. But as long as we're using the data correctly, and there obviously needs to be more work done on that, but use the raw data, we may actually get a lot more clinical benefit out of derived data, if you know what I mean.
Okay, so how can clinicians measure? What should they be doing? What
well, this is the question, and I love anything about body composition. However, I think what we really need to do is it's function, if you know what I mean. So regardless of what turns up on a DEXA or whatever, if that person can or can't get out of a chair, walk 6 metres. So there's a whole lot of tests that are done now in nursing homes for people, timed up and goes, chair stands, all that kind of thing. They're the functional outcomes, which I think are really important. But what we need, and grip strength is the other one that I think is really important to do, and we need to start doing this on a serial basis. So rather than saying I pulled 30 kilograms or whatever, what does that mean? We need to start measuring that in people from their 30s onwards, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
Dead cheap to do, reliable, all that kind of thing. We can actually begin to track people and their strength measurements. So for younger people, it might be push-ups or doing some other work. But for older people, there's a whole battery of tests out now that people can use, which are cheap as chips and easy to do.
And I guess if you wanted a motivator so that they had maximal grip strength, you could get them to hold onto a pole while they're on the edge of a cliff. Just kidding.
That would be really good when you're stamping on their fingers as well, yeah.
I was just thinking...
You did make a good point there, is that often when people talk, if you go to talk to a doctor about diet and exercise, it's often, Andrew, as you know, it's seen as, even in diabetes, it's seen as pejorative terms, you know what I mean? Diet and exercise. This is all we're talking about is diet and exercise.
Yeah, diet and exercise.
If you start talking about quality of life, and so you want to keep going to bowls, you want to keep playing golf, going on that walking holiday, trekking, whatever you want to do, walking to the shops. Because we're living longer with this chronic disability thing, there's a lot to be said as a motivator for people. Move away from weight, obesity, whatever, and talk about quality of life, if you know what I mean. So,
I would add to that for all of our clinicians listening out there is that always put a quality of life parameter into your management goals. It can't just be about biological or biochemical parameters. It's got to be about what that patient needs to or wants to do.
Yeah. Well, I think if they concentrate on muscle quality via diet and exercise, they'll see. I mean, there's no doubt. My wife's a physio as well, and you speak to other exercise physiologists or whatever who deal in this area, that people can get highly motivated when they're, when they have been housebound. They can move up a level, get more freedom, to do things, and go out gardening, pick up the kids, all those things that they thought they'd lost, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And what we do know is that the great work that Professor Freya Tarani Singh has done, she's out at Lidcombe now, University of Sydney. She showed ages ago, she had studies where they had people up to the age of 96 doing resistance training and getting great results, if you know what I mean. So
and indeed, even if they institute that,
in all ages and in all conditions. You know what I mean?
And even if they start that later on in life, they can regain mobility. They can regain effects.
Muscle is very plastic.
So we're talking about muscle and we're talking about protein. So what about putting just more protein in? Is it as simple as that?
It isn't. It isn't. There's no doubt. I think that we're probably everyone seems to think that we have too much protein in our diets, but for the elderly, their protein requirements are actually higher than younger people. But the problem is it's occurring at the same time that their energy intake is declining.
Right.
So that I've just got a graph here that I'll just see if I can find. But if you worked out how much protein they actually required, I've got one here. It says for a male 31 to 50, they need 4.7 grams of protein per 1,000 kilojoules of intake. But for a male or female greater than 70 years of age, it's 7 grams of protein per 1,000 kilojoules. So there's a real need, to get more protein in. However, they're usually eating less, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And that could be an issue.
And that's timed with, lesser appetite, less taste sensation as you age, all that sort of thing. But I think one of the points that we need to be clear on is that's when they've already got sarcopenia. We need to be addressing these patients before they have these issues. So we need to be talking to patients in their 30s before they're over the hill, before they're teetering on the edge of that cliff. So you're talking about measuring grip strength early, looking at flexibility and other parameters of lifestyle early, And what should they be doing earlier with regards to diet?
I think it's just, anything that's a good diet, and we can discuss what, based on Mediterranean diet, whatever.
Yep. The low pasta Mediterranean diet, that is. The actual Mediterranean diet, not our westernised, bastardised attempt at it, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things is that in some studies of elderly people, they've shown that omega-3 supplements can actually increase muscle strength and mass, even without resistance training.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so things like vitamin D, essential because it's really important for muscle strength. So vitamin D is as much a muscle vitamin as it is a bone vitamin.
Yes.
So they're just the common things, but really, to me, it's the exercise, if you know what I mean. So we really got to get people thinking about exercising. As I say, once you're 50 on, some form of resistance training combined with whatever physical activity you want to do needs almost to be mandatory, if you know what I mean. If you're not using your muscles, a contraction a day keeps the doctor away, Andrew, I'd say. So we really need to, and the beauty about resistance training is it can be done at home. You can use dumbbells and bands, you can use kettles, you can use machines. Yeah. There's just so many different ways you can do it, if you know what I mean.
Beer bottles excluded. It does not mean reaching for a heavier bottle of wine, is that right?
I don't know, that's good summer exercise, that one. But, yeah.
So what I was thinking of there is when you mentioned about vitamin D being as important for muscle as bone, I'd just like to put a point in for our listeners. And Professor Michael Hollick made this point, and it's a way in which research can give you exactly the wrong message. So, for instance, a high amount of vitamin D increases falls. Now, Michael Hollick explains this. He says, well, hang on. If they're vitamin D deficient and they're going to take a high amount of vitamin D, it works on bones very slowly, but it works on muscles extremely quickly. And so what happens is these people have still got frail bones. They get up because their muscles have just been re-energized, and of course they fall over and break something. So it's a salient point, isn't it? That we really should be looking at prevention, obviously, but we really should be intervening early.
Well, the other thing about vitamin D also, as you would know, you've done a lot of work in vitamin D area, is it's like related to that area of non-specific pain, if you know what I mean. And often in people as they age, if they get things like non-specific pain, that can somehow limit their ability or their wish to exercise. And just want to point out for a lot of people who have osteoarthritis, for example, that in the knee, is that resistance training is probably one of the best things you can do for it. Though people would be reluctant to do it, thinking it's going to hurt them, if you know what I mean. But you really need to build that muscle up around that quad area again, if you know what I mean, in the legs.
So the old adage of move it or lose it still prevails.
Yeah, absolutely. So anything that forces people to be, and we know even with bed rest, I mean, the modern thinking, and when I say modern, been around for a while, is to get people mobile as quickly as they can once they're in hospital. That's probably the best advice you can get, because the longer that you are bedridden, and even some studies have shown even really short periods of time, just like a week being in bed, can result in profound muscle and strength loss. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, and it can be hard to get back. They find sometimes months later they haven't fully recovered even once they're up. So so you really do need to be moving, as being mobile is a good thing.
What about the different types of protein, plant versus animal, for instance? When we're talking about let's say if you wanted to just look at nitrogen, but nitrogen balance, but Lauren Cordain's attributes regarding what was he talking about milk. He's not a fan of milk at all, saying that you've got a high amount of calcium, but you've also got a high amount of phosphate, which leads to calcium. So you're putting it in and taking it out. Whereas if you don't have milk, the calcium is retained. I'm interested also in the alkalinity aspect, which is it's been a naturopathic concept that's prevailed, but I have issues in where we're measuring it.
We could have a whole session on that. But just to say, with protein, the studies do show that things like whey protein, are probably, when I say superior to soy and other things, on a chronic, if you're year in, year out, is it going to, what's the difference going to be? Possibly marginal, but it is better, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And that comes back to the relationship, probably to the branch change, the leucine being the mTOR, the real driver of the muscle protein synthesis kind of area. Yep. But if you're vegetarian, you want to take soy or pea protein or whatever, that would be fine. And in terms of all other things that you were doing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have a, they use whatever protein source they want, but I'd say the ones with the higher biological value, clearly the egg and the whey. If you're not vegetarian, go for those. That's fine.
Yeah, I used to think it was hilarious when the bodybuilders that used to come into the place where I worked, and most of them would use whey of the varying types, whey protein, concentrate, isolate, blah blah blah, concentrate, isolate. But once in a blue moon, you would get a meathead coming in, and forgive me for doing the poor accent, but he would go, "Where is my egg protein?" and they egg protein, and they would be the ones going for the egg protein, but it would be the dusty single can in the corner that was nearly out of date,
Right.
because it tastes rubbish. Eat eggs, for goodness sake.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the issue. For elderly people is if you're getting them protein, is that thing of they're not going to walk in and walk out with a bottle of Mega Blaster Nitro Killer kind of diet. That's just doesn't fit them. But also protein supplements sometimes in elderly people, because they're so satiating, they may just compensate at other periods of the day, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So the theory at the moment is optimal protein intake really should be about 25 grams of protein per meal. Mm-hmm. Rather than like tea and toast for breakfast, cheese and salad for lunch, and then a whopping big steak for dinner. Yeah, some people that's not the optimal way. So spread it out, but you need that minimal 20-25 grams per meal to do it.
You know what? I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Yeah. It's not just the wrong types of foods that we tend to choose, but we tend to choose the wrong types of foods at the wrong time of day. That's a very salient point.
There's some work around that versus having little bits of protein throughout the day.
Yep.
Now, the other thing, I'd point out there's been an interesting trial done on collagen, and for many people, collagen is used, beauty products, collagen drinks for skin and all that kind of thing. But there is another collagen trial being done, published in the British Journal of Nutrition late last year, where 15 grams a day in elderly men increased strength and muscle, which is really interesting because I'll just resolve that around to vitamin D as well, because some trials with protein supplements and that they can sometimes see an increase in muscle mass, but not in strength, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. And then just very quickly, there was one study done in it's like a mixture of protein and other amino acids, and they did it for a whole year, which is a great study, with resistance training. And when they published it, they said increase in muscle mass, no increase in strength. They went back and then they republished about a year later, and they said, look, when we went back and had a look at the vitamin D levels, those who had adequate vitamin D levels got muscle mass and strength. Those who didn't have the adequate vitamin D just got muscle but no strength.
Wow.
So it comes around to, and I often think that if they're not assessing vitamin D in a lot of these trials, it's probably a huge confounding factor. Actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and knowing what we know about the omega-3 is probably the same as well. So, but the collagen one's interesting. It's only 15 grams a day, once a day. That's all I had to take.
And the source was from what?
Bovine
collagen.
They're all different. As you know, there's probably lots of different brands on the market.
So when you're talking bovine cartilage extract? Yeah,
it's the peptides. So it's what they call collagen peptides.
Okay.
So this particular, I think it's a Gelita product. It's just it's not a trade. It's not a market brand name. It's like a company that produces it for other companies to sell. But this particular product is their bovine gelatin. In this particular case, is different from other gelatins, from whether from pig or fish, due to the peptide ratios and whatever. I'm not that much across it, but. Just to say, in this trial, it seemed to work pretty well at only 15 grams a day, which is a small dose, and it's pretty tasteless, if you know what I mean. So,
and is that something that practitioners can acquire in Australia?
I think they should shortly, I would think. The trade name in this particular paper was Body Balance. That was from Gelita. Now, I think they're looking to try and on-sell it to companies in Australia to use. So hopefully it will be available in Australia, in the retail market. So that would be good.
Yeah,
I think that's a good option for elderly people to get into. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier, the importance of the inflammatory signals, and you mentioned fish oil, but there's so many other things out there that are anti-inflammatory. that don't have the deleterious effects that things like NSAIDs do. Notwithstanding that aspirin does appear to have some long-term benefits on reducing cancer risk. But what sort of other things should we be looking at to dampen these inflammatory signals that worsen the sarcopenic sort of issue?
Yeah, that Mediterranean diet is we know that if you follow a good Mediterranean diet with your extra virgin olive oil.
Yep.
And things like that, and also, which is good, but it's also that omega-3, omega-6 ratio, so you can get your omega-6 ratio down, if you know what I mean, but just not using crappy vegetable oils.
Yes.
The other thing, just interesting, there has been one observational work done showing that those people who take NSAIDs are a lot less likely to get sarcopenia. Now, that work needs to be followed up. I'm just saying that's an observation. It's not an intervention study by any means. But it is very interesting. But the flip to that is that those who take long-term NSAIDs have poorer cognition.
Yeah.
Whereas, generally speaking, lower the inflammation, the better the cognition. But in just my quick reading of this a couple of days ago, that NSAIDs don't seem to be associated with a decrease in cognitive decline.
And all NSAIDs.
That is an interesting point. So anti-inflammatories. Well, the other thing about it is just your things like your curcumins. Things like that as well. And the reason is that when people age, and I'm in my 50s, I'll tell you exactly what I am, but it's that when you're training, it's the recovery time, which is absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
So anything we can do to help increase the efficiency of the recovery time, because really it's the muscle remodeling goes on when you're not in the gym, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So you just can't go 5 times a week, and it actually sometimes it's better to have a longer recovery time so your muscles do recover properly, particularly as you're aging. And these things that can actually help, it could be things like your curcumins and other things as well, natural anti-inflammatory agents, which actually help to some degree with muscle recovery. Could be quite good, but we need to do studies in that area, definitely.
Sure. Just to add to your point about NSAIDs and cognition, and all NSAIDs carry stratified cardiovascular risk depending on which type they are, but all of them are in that risk category. So where do we go from here? We're an ageing population. What we've said, we should be looking at grip strength. We're looking at these sort of issues with flexibility earlier. Should be making sure that our patients have a diet. But that's once we're intervening. How do we turn this around? What sort of message should we be sending?
Well, I'll give you an insight. Some years ago, we actually did a focus group at the company I work for, talking about muscles and aging in people. And the people said it absolutely was one of the things that they never seen anything resonate with people so well. In fact, some people said, I'm going to see my doctor tomorrow and tell him. And some people said, we don't believe what you're saying because my doctor's never talked to me about why muscles are important when I'm aging. Yeah. And I think really it's an education thing across health professionals for a start. Yeah. So everyone is fixated about body weight and all that kind of thing. And they're good reasons, particularly, that early middle age, people overweight, large waist circumference, definitely not a good thing. But as they're getting older, those people older, we really got to focus on muscle. And a key question could be just how physically active are you? Are you exercising? Because if they're not exercising, and the research seems to show all that work by Stephen Blair and those that regardless what BMI you are, if you're physically active and engaged in exercise, it can have a major impact on your risk factors anyway, if you know what I mean. So a lot of a key question. The people I'd be saying in their 30s and 40s and 50s, are you physically? And also, Andrew, as you know, we're all bound to our desks in front of computers.
Yes, this is where I was going to go.
Yeah, that's that anti-physical activity. So it actually can impact even on your exercise. So you might be exercising, but if your bum's on the seat 10 hours a day and you're not moving, it's actually going to counteract some of that exercise that you're doing anyway. So
Lise Alschuler pointed out that or made that point with regards to exercise, because she said, I thought I was doing exercise because I'd do my morning exercise, I'd go for a walk, but then I would be bound to the desk for the rest of the day. I was sitting for more than 8 hours. And so what should we be doing with regards to physical activity, and how much is adequate? Because a lot of people say, I exercise, I walk down the shops to get my pack of beer and I carry it home. So that's resistant exercise. So, what should we be looking at? What is actually a good amount of exercise and what type?
Just doing things like walking up to shop. We know all that's good, but that's not exercise, which as we get older, in some ways, which is going to counteract the muscle loss, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So if you're walking up hills and you've got weights on and you're doing all that, that's great. But we do need, as we're getting older, to do structured exercise. Now, the good thing is, your listeners would be aware of, this high intensity exercise.
Yep.
So you can do 5 minutes a week, which is comparative to half an hour of longer endurance exercise. Resistance training, it could be as little as 2 sessions a week, if you know what I mean.
That's really interesting stuff, and I'm really interested in this. I've forgotten his name, Dr. Michael Mosley?
Michael Mosley, yeah.
Dr. Michael Mosley. So, but wasn't he talking about that research and it was dependent on a gene, like a phenotype? Well,
that's the other interesting thing. We talk about people doing exercise. Clearly, as a child and as an adolescent, I was a sprinter. I'm not a long-distance runner. So for me, I've never found just going out, trying to get fit by running long, it's never worked for me.
Boring, yeah.
Yeah, well, no, it's just I just never get anywhere. I get to a certain point and I just plateau. But if I go to the gym and work out resistance training and do sprint training, I get fit that way. Then I can do my endurance training.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean? Yeah, so we have to match the type of exercise to the person, clearly what they like to do, you know what I mean?
Yes.
But just having a round of golf, going for a walk, that's great, but it's not what you'd call, it's physical activity, but it's not necessarily exercise, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So for people who'd like to do that, and I always say, if you want to keep playing golf in your 70s and 80s and 90s and whatever, if you do resistance training, you will be able to do that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But the golf in itself probably is not going to be enough. So, I mean, all those professional they're all training, if you know what I mean, working out and training.
Yeah, they're not getting fit from the golf.
Yeah, that's right. They're getting fit to play golf, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so, otherwise we'd have extremely fit pharmacists all over the country.
That's right. So, I mean, any form of, I think that's, it has to be physical activity which is pleasurable to people, something which is clearly nowadays time effective. And I think that's the one thing about that high-intensity training, that even though it hurts, people seem to prefer to do something that's quick and sharp, even though it hurts, rather than on a treadmill or working out for long periods of time. And you can do the same with muscle resistance training as well. If you go and if you do have chronic disease, you can refer on to physios or exercise physiologists to get the right advice. But there's a whole that whole exercise, how you do resistance training. There's a whole genre. There's multiple genres of what is the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Other than to say that we need to be looking just not at muscle mass, hypertrophy, but it's the power strength that we really need to be focusing on. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, but in all cases, they should be guided by somebody who's well versed in that.
Yeah, I mean, the older that you get, as you're younger, you can go into the gym, people just go in, they throw a few weights around after seeing a trainer or something like that. But clearly, if you're in your 60s or 70s and you may have osteoarthritis, you may have diabetes, whatever, you definitely need to get professional advice. And I think even in Australia, over the age of 40 for males or something, 45, you actually should get a doctor's clearance before you go out and exercise. I think it might be 50, 55 for women.
Yep.
So you should, if you haven't done it for quite a while, you just need to go back and speak to the doctor, and he'll check your heart out and do whatever and give you that kind of clearance. But there's really, as we're saying with that work by Professor Fairtrani Singh, there is no age limit or barrier really to doing resistance training in particular. And people just need to be guided how to do it.
Loved your work. That's really interesting stuff that you brought up there. And I think it's pertinent for everybody. Every single patient walking into every single clinic is likely to have some sort of issue with this as they age. That's just our lifestyle now. And I just think it's so important to be aware of these issues that people will experience later, and for clinicians to be aware that they can do simple things now to keep them on track. So well done.
Yeah, thank you.
So Chris, thank you so much for taking us through not just what sarcopenia is, but also how it affects us and what we can do to thwart its ongoing effects. I really appreciate your work in this area, and also you bringing it to the public's attention. Well done.
Okay, well thanks, Andrew. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
This is FX Medicine, and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today on FX Medicine, please engage with us and let us know what further topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in contact with us through our website fxmedicine.com.au or look for FX Medicine in your favourite social media platform. You can also rate and review us on iTunes, and we'd really like to thank those who have already rated us. It's through your continued support that enables us to bring you current, complex and relevant topics to enhance your practice of natural medicine.